Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. Migrant tent fiasco has Governor Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson publicly at odds.
I've been planning for Plan B, C, and D, and F, E, and F from the very moment that I became the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Mayor Johnson on the hot seat. The state abruptly stops construction of Brighton Park migrant tents, citing environmental contamination on the site. The dispute has put Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker at odds, with the governor's office clearly unhappy with how the city has managed the migrant crisis. Ed Burke's alleged attempts to shake down a Southwest Side Burger King, the focus of testimony this week in the former alderman's federal corruption trial. Mixed news on city crime numbers. Murders are down, but robberies are up. Controversial provision in the new Chicago police contract gets shot down in a city council committee, setting up a battle with the FOP. And in sports, the Bears are reportedly surveying land just south of Soldier Field for a potential new stadium, but park advocates are already throwing the penalty flag. We have a lot to chew on, and joining us are Steve Daniels from the Chicago Tribune, Dan Mihalopoulos from WBEZ, Block Club Chicago's Madison Saavedra, and our very own Matt Masterson of WTTW News. So let's get right into it. Madison Saavedra, let's go over the timeline. The Brighton Park migrant tents go up. Mayor Johnson says it's going to be safe despite the contamination. The state abruptly stops and says, no, it's not safe, and you did not accurately measure this or quantify it. Unpack all of this.
Well, it's a lot to unpack, and it happened in a really short amount of time. Last week, there was, big push. Everybody wanted to hear about this environmental report because this Brighton Park tent camp had a history of industrial use. And I think the big question was, is this going to be safe for people? Is this going to be safe for children? Is this going to be safe for people who are working there? And the city did ultimately make that report available through some FOIA requests late Friday, and they said that it was safe despite finding high levels of mercury and other toxic, metals. And then, like you said, the governor's office came out and said the Illinois EPA reviewed this, and while the city may think it's safe, we do not think it's safe, and just halted it despite there being tent structures. I mean, our colleagues were down there. They saw the tents were up. Work had been done.
Migrants were going to move in pretty quickly. Steve Daniels, the governor takes over because the state is funding this to the tune of $65 million. Clearly unhappy with the Johnson administration, thinking they're not competent in the way they're handling this.
Yes, that was absolutely. I think they said that, and they made that clear in making this decision. And what I think, though, that we ought to remember is that it took an awfully long time for the state to raise these alarms. And they were right going down the Brighton Park pathway for a long time. It was their money, and they said, yes, use it for Brighton Park. And then, it seemed like it all came up at the end.
Does Johnson have a point when he says, hey, the state never told me that these were the standards that we had to go by?
I guess, look, from the Chicago Tribune's point of view, and a lot of other people, I think, who were critical of this, this seemed like a terrible idea from the start. This is a former zinc smelter. It was the nastiest stuff imaginable goes into doing that kind of thing. It would have been surprising if there weren't toxics all over the land there. So why even start there? There's a million empty parcels all over the city of Chicago.
And Dan Mihalopoulos, Mayor Johnson there, says he's looking for Plan B, C, D, and F. He's got those plans. What are those plans?
Oof, good question. I mean, there are other sites and there are things in the works, but Brighton Park encountered something that I think we'll see in other places where there's backlash. You can call it not in my backyard, but there are homeowners, working class or even middle class homeowners in the Southwest Side there who are, and a lot of them are immigrants themselves, by the way, Asian, Latinos, and there was a huge backlash. There were chanting in Spanish against the migrants going to Brighton Park. So what do you do now? I mean, I think the only thing that the mayor can hold on to right now is that there are fewer people in police stations and at the airport apparently than there were some time ago, according to their numbers. And so that's a scenario that that you want to diminish, and you want that to be going away, because next year is the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and don't kid yourself, that was on the mind of Johnson as well as Pritzker.
It was on the mind of Governor
Bigfooted him.
Pritzker because this is Governor Pritzker, his big show. He wants to showcase Chicago. He wants to showcase himself, and it's not a secret that he probably wants to run for president, and he can't have a problem on his hands. So, Madison Saavedra, we have a brick and mortar site in Little Village. There's a possible lot on the far south side. Where are these migrants going to go now?
Well, I think the brick and mortar shelters, that's something that Mayor Brandon Johnson keeps, doubling down on. Every time somebody would critique the base camps, it seemed like he would say, well, we're still building the brick and mortar shelters, which while they have faced some, pushback in all the communities they've been built, I think we can all agree not at the same level that the base camp in Brighton Park had faced. And like you mentioned, that far south side lot at 115th and Halstead, that has also been earmarked for a base camp. City Council, I believe it was last month, maybe 2 months ago, okayed the purchase of that with the deadline of, can't be there past November 2024. But there haven't been any updates on that. I would guess that everything that's just gone down with the Brighton Park tent camp, I would guess that the city wants to make sure they're not going to make the same mistakes.
Matt Masterson, you even have a progressive alderwoman, very progressive alderwoman, Jeanette Taylor, saying, we progressives, we're not ready to govern here. Is this a pretty rough start to the Johnson mayoral administration?
It is a difficult start. Obviously, you want Pritzker to be on your side. He can be your biggest ally, and getting off to this butting heads right now, it's not a good look for Johnson. It's not a good look for either side. But I don't know if this will define his capability of being a leader throughout his term, but he needs to make sure that it doesn't, that he needs to make sure that he gets through this and that they're able to come together and figure something out going forward. And they don't have a lot of time because they're going to need to do this before the snow hits the ground soon.
Then that's the thing. Are you guys surprised at the fact that this sparring between the governor and the mayor is going on in public? We kept getting competing press releases saying, no, the mayor didn't consider this, and the mayor saying, no, the state never told me this. This is going on in public. They're clearly at an impasse here. How serious is that?
Well, it's real. I mean, they said there was a story in the Sun-Times just recently about the tensions between them. They all say, oh, well, you guys in the media are trying to pit people against each other and make drama where there isn't anything. And then this happens, where it's very clear to me, I call it nothing but bigfooting by the part of the state. And they would say they had to do it. The devil's in the details. Were 6 inches enough of gravel to put on top of the contaminated soil and build the tents on top of it? All that aside, it's not a personality conflict, but there are differing views here, and it is a real thing.
But it's just interesting that they're not working this out behind the scenes. They're working it out in public.
I think it is worthy of note. I think it is something that we're going to need to watch going forward on other issues. And obviously, the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois have to deal with each other on things just all the time. That's just the nature of their situations, and it will bear close watching going forward. I don't expect it to be much improved anytime soon.
All right, let's move on to the Ed Burke trial. Matt Masterson, you've been in the courtroom all week. So this week, prosecutors are talking about the alleged Burger King scheme, where the officials that own the Burger King franchise said Ed Burke's overtures to hire his law firm were weird. Not weird enough to contact law enforcement. So break down how prosecutors are presenting this alleged scheme.
So they're saying that these owners from Houston, they bought this Burger King a few years before this all happened in 2017. They wanted to remodel it. They thought they had the go-ahead. They got a building permit from the city, and they talked with Burke back and forth. There were some overtures about his law firm. He mentioned on a recorded phone call that he wanted to get some of their law business. He thought that they owned hundreds of restaurants in the city. They do own several, but not quite that many. But once the project actually got underway, they did a site visit, and Burke and his assistant, Peter Andrews, who's also charged in this case, they brought up that there were driveway permit issues and that there were overnight truck parking issues. And the owners were surprised by this. They said they had never really heard any of these complaints, but they wanted to get it figured out. They ended up going ahead with the reconstruction, the remodeling project, and the day that it started, Ed Burke drives by and sees that it's going on. He says, why is this happening? He calls Peter Andrews. He asks, why was I able to...
Co-defendant, Peter
Right,
Andrews,
correct.
top 8 of his.
Says, why was I able to hold this up? And they talk again about the driveway permits. Now, from the defense's side, this was a legitimate issue, that there were driveway permits that they needed to get hammered out. But it wasn't an issue that was supposed to hold up the remodeling. The problem there was that he had kept going to these owners and saying, hey, would you like to hire Clafter and Burke, his property tax firm, to handle some of the restaurants that you own in Illinois and Chicago?
This is a big company. It's not, they don't just own that Burger King. So he's thinking that there's a lot of ground beef here that he can bring into his firm. But Dan Mihalopoulos, this alleged scheme, this kind of features some of the most potent Ed Burke comments caught on tape, where he's literally connecting the tax business that he wants to his approval of this driveway.
Yeah, and absolutely. This is what this whole trial is about, is this blend of politics, public service, and on the other hand, the personal profit that he can get from just doing his job that he's elected to do, or not doing it and holding that back in exchange for what he wants. And, you know, there were messages given that you have to give to the community, and, you know, that's the price of
Give
doing
to Tony
business
Preckwinkle.
in Chicago. And so what we have here is a very classic situation where, and if you watch those videos that were secretly recorded by another former alderman, Danny Solis, who found himself in trouble and then cooperated. It's more than just the quotes that we saw there, many of which are classics, instant classics.
This video here is amazing. This is in Danny Solis's office. Solis sits down. Now look at this. Okay, cut off. He sits down in front of the camera, and then like instantaneously, he moves like to his right, like he knows he's blocking the camera there. I mean, Solis
might have a future in the film industry,
or as a mole or something like that, as he's been doing here. But Steve Daniels, prosecutors, are they making a strong case here?
Yeah, I think so. So I think, particularly on the Burger King situation, and there's been obviously several discrete situations that have been, formed the foundation of the case. That one seems the strongest to me. And it seems real. If it's not a quid pro quo, it's the next thing too. It's right
Although
there.
he never got to business, and there's testimony that this company didn't think that Clafter and Burke was a very good tax firm, right?
That's true, but also he's charged with attempted extortion. He didn't have to make out any of this business to be charged with this. This is what he was allegedly trying to do, and that's enough to get this charge here.
And he never got to business. So Danny Solis, as we mentioned, the defense is going to call him potentially next week as a witness. What do you think that's going to be like?
It's going to be interesting. Burke's attorney, Chris Gare, has been licking his chops trying to get him on the stand. He seemed very excited about directly examining him, trying to get Danny Solis to say he was a rat, that he rolled over on his colleague, Ed Burke, and that he did this to save his own skin. He was approached by FBI agents who had been investigating him. He instantly started cooperating. I think they said the next day he agreed to start cooperating with federal investigators and with Burke.
He did everything that they asked him to do. When they said jump, he literally said, how high, Madison Savager? I mean, he did, the quote unquote rat, I mean, he kind of was. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's fascinating. I know you guys have talked about this before, but just watching the tapes, I mean, having those, made public it's like, if that's the stuff that was caught, I mean, it just leaves you to let your imagination run wild of like what hasn't been caught and how long has business like this, been done. And I know we know the answer to that is probably a long time, probably too long. But I don't know, it's interesting.
Dan Mihalopoulos, probably a long time.
He was only an alderman for more than 50 years. I mean, no, I think what we're going to call Danny Solis here and what we're going to hear him called, there's a lot of, let's just say, jargon terminology for this in Chicago politics. It's considered to be the greatest of betrayals, to be a rat, as you said, a beefer, a flipper. The opposite of that is to be a stand-up guy and to be somebody who doesn't sing to save his own skin, but he's saying like a canary almost from the minute that he got caught in his own misdeeds. They're going to point out all of his misdeeds. We've seen this before. I don't remember a time that worked in puncturing a case. So, the feds have a 90+%. It might even be in the high 90% range for success. But Ed Burke amassed over the years a lot of money, not just from his clients, but also in his campaign funds. At one point, probably more than $10 million. And he's been burning through that. I don't know how much is left at this juncture, but those lawyers every day
these are high-priced
reducing that.
Lawyers from white-collar law firms here.
Former prosecutors themselves.
Former prosecutors. Let's move on to some of the crime statistics that we saw this week in the Sun-Times. Matt Masterson, We have kind of a dual situation going on here. Murders are down this year, thankfully, but robberies are up 20%. What accounts for all this?
Robberies have been going up it seems like it's a different crime every year. Last year it was carjackings, this year it's armed robberies. There's just always something that seems to be skyrocketing, even if other crimes are coming down. There's been a lot of issues with that this year. I don't know exactly what the cause of that is, but I think people have been enthusiastic about seeing the murder numbers come down, the shooting numbers come down, but those are down compared to 2019, or I'm sorry, compared to 2020, 21, 22. They're still at 2019 levels. They're still higher than they have been for much of the last 2 decades, where they are moving in a right direction. It's a positive thing to see that, but it's also not the end game here. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Right.
On
2020 was such a high year,
Right.
in 2021 that it seems like there was really no place to go but
Right.
down from there, hopefully. Dan Milopoulos, you have an investigation that just came out today, incredible. A former cop who had 2 controversial fatal shootings that the superintendent wanted fired, that cost the city millions of dollars because of misconduct case, wrongful shooting. He's now running for judge, and he has the backing of a prominent Democratic donor. Why is this donor backing this man?
Well, he's getting a big loan, $500,000 from his wife. His name is Sergeant John Poulos, by the way. He's running in a sub-circuit, a new sub-circuit that takes up a big chunk of the north side. And so it'll be on your ballot in the March Democratic primary, despite nearly $2 million in settlements from those 2 fatal shootings in 2013 and again in 2016 of young black men. I talked to their families, who were the plaintiffs in those cases against the city and who got those settlements. They were flabbergasted to learn from us that he was running for judge, and it's like picking at an old scab
this
for them.
donor, though, why do you think the donor would kind of look past that and want to support him?
Well, he's getting support, I guess, from his wife and also from the Second Ward committeeman, who's Tim Egan, the head of the Democratic Party in the Second Ward. We tried to ask him, and he wouldn't comment on why he's supporting John Poulos to be a Cook County Circuit Court judge, despite the track record that we laid out in that story today with Tom Schuba in the Sun-Times.
It's a fascinating investigation. Another one of your incredible pieces of work, Dan Milopoulos, that you just do over and over again. So we'll have to see where this goes. Speaking of police, Steve Daniels, City Council committee this week, they approved the new labor contract with the police, but then they shot down a portion of it that's very controversial that would allow for closed-door arbitration for serious police misconduct cases. First of all, why is that provision so controversial?
Well, it's so controversial because we're talking about the worst kinds of police misconduct cases, which for a very long time have been handled in public. And an arbitrator ruled, this was after a very long period of time before this arbitrator on this issue, ruled that the union was right to be able to have these things handled in arbitration behind closed doors, where the public couldn't see what went into the decision. So that is highly controversial for Laquan McDonald isn't that long time ago, right? I mean, people recall that this sort of thing, it was tough to get surfaced into the public realm.
The argument that you made, we should mention FOP President John Catanzara is going to be here on our show Monday, because now this is going to go to the full City Council on Wednesday. The argument that the union makes is that all other unions have this ability. Like their cases are not adjudicated in public like our members are by the police board. Is that a fair argument?
What happens when a cop makes a mistake? Often, like we were just discussing in the other case with John Poulos, somebody dies. These are important issues to know if police power, people who are serving and protecting ostensibly, are misusing their power. The stories that we do, in many cases, sometimes it ends up in court and you can hear about it that way, but oftentimes we rely on misconduct files, which I think should be transparent. If there are complaints and they've had internal investigations and they've turned out one way or another way, and most often they turn out that they say that the police didn't do anything wrong, why shouldn't that be transparent? That's my question.
We're also, these are confined to the most serious police. It's not as if all police misconduct cases
The FOP
are
wants
handled
the
this way.
most serious cases
Right.
behind closed doors.
Right. So that's really the issue. The vast majority of cases are not like this, right? So those are handled in arbitration, just like every other city department.
All right, so this is a very complicated process now, Madison. So the council shoots down this controversial provision. City council, it seems like they would shoot it down, but that's not the end of it, because the FOP says, hey, the arbitrator ruled that this is the way it has to be. So then what, does it just go to court?
My understanding is that, yes, whatever happens at the city council, like you just said, it's not necessarily the end of the road for this. And I mean, because there has been such a push in the public for more civilian oversight and accountability for things like this, I mean, of course, I would be shocked to see, you know, the city council not try to prevent it from happening.
All right, speaking of city council, Dan Mihalopoulos, after a huge outcry, perhaps it's walking back its proposal to only allow invited guests to come watch a public meeting on the floor of city council and confine everybody else to the third floor where it's windowed in and you can't really see anything.
Yeah, there's been some bad behavior, okay? And the mayor apparently is hesitant to, you know, apprehend people and just toss them out. So they came up with some rules, and they're talking now about only invited guests, only people with a reservation being able to go on the second floor. And mind you, these people, everyone who comes in there has gone through metal detectors already. So it's not so much a safety thing. It's a really bad look for the mayor, absolutely horrible look for someone who was elected, saying that this is going to be the people's building, he's going to be the people's mayor and the people's administration. It looks very starkly undemocratic and unreformist to be putting in these. I mean, I was joking today, like, what are you going to be able, you can imagine the ways that Chicago political types can manipulate this. What are they going to have, PSLs or something like that, where you buy a season ticket or something?
Just get supporters in there.
Ridiculous.
All right, well, speaking of PSLs, we have to address this Bears story. So reportedly, they're considering maybe not doing Arlington Heights and building something on the parking lot just south of Soldier Field and staying in Chicago. How serious do you think that is?
Well, that's hard to say, but I mean, if they're having discussions with the mayor about that, I would imagine it's not unserious. Let's put it that
Apparently
way.
they're surveying that land.
Right, and you know, there's something to be said for thinking about that. I mean, the lakefront has been a really good location for the Bears. Soldier Field is not a good stadium. I mean, it's one of the worst in the NFL. So. They can make a case that now, but then we're going to get into the legal issues and the lakefront issues and all of that.
Well, there's the Lakefront Protection Ordinance, which forbids any private development, any further private development on the lakefront like that. The Lucas Museum found that out. They went to court, and then they just kind of left town. Friends of the Parks, the advocacy group, is already saying, we're going to sue if the Bears try to do this. Do they have a case?
Sure. I mean, I think that in the case of Lucas, we didn't actually get to the final point where there was a final ruling because they just said, forget this. But at the very least, what's going to happen if they go forward with this is it's going to take a long time. It's going to go through the courts. It's going to be delayed. We've seen the advocacy groups use the courts to delay, including the Obama spot too.
But somehow that got approved. A private building in a public park.
But it took a long time, right? They waited it out and did it. But
so I have to bring up in your paper, State Representative Cam Buckner, who is that's his district. Soldier Field is in his district. Is saying, what if we made this stadium public-private? So say something like McPier, the Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority that owns McCormick Place and Navy Pier. Say they built it, they owned it. Does that make it public? Does that make it pass the Lakefront Protection Ordinance?
We did that with Guaranteed Rate Field, more or less, right? I mean, and Jerry Reinsdorf doesn't own it, but he owns it, right? He
got it built for free, basically.
Right, and he calls the shots.
And now he's going to move to Nashville.
But at any rate, it's a clever way to potentially get around this. We have a model in Guaranteed Rate Field where that occurred.
That means it would be public dollars, though, that would go toward this.
Yep. It would likely mean that, which would be
You're shaking your head, Dan.
Whenever you hear public-private partnership, they're reaching for our wallets, okay? And this is what all the teams do. That's why they're playing Arlington Heights and the northwest suburbs off of the city of Chicago. Yeah, I mean, it's subsidies. If this were something else, that's what they would call it. If it were a farmland, or if it were, I mean, they would call it welfare, frankly, if there were individuals getting that. So.
Well, keep in mind that Arlington Heights, what the Bears were going to do with their own money, they wanted a deal on the property taxes.
They want some kind of public assistance in some way.
Which is a subsidy, right?
Yeah.
That's a subsidy, but it's not building the stadium with public dollars. In this case, you might be doing that, which might not be optimal.
All right, well, you have been an optimal panel, but we're out of time. So my thanks to Steve Daniels, Dan Mihalopoulos, Madison Saavedra, and Matt Masterson. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Happy Friday, everybody. That's our show. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Stutz. Thank you. Can't even say my own name. Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy. Have a great weekend. Let's say the Bears, they tear down Lakeside Center. They restore parkland. They turn Soldier Field into some kind of public park. You're gaining parkland.
If they did something like that,
it's a parking lot that's sitting there.
That would be a real interesting approach.
I think they'd have to do that kind of trade-off.
My question is, how does that solve the issue of it is so hard to get to that part of the lakefront? Like,
there are a lot of people that complain about that.
As someone who went to the Taylor Swift concert, it was impossible to leave there.
Oh, you just realized it with a Taylor Swift
Yeah,
concert?
I'm not a Bears fan.
Soccer fans and football fans have been suffering.
No.
Maybe she needs to date somebody on the Bears, and the Bears.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 20 attorneys who have been named in the 2024 edition of the Best Lawyers in America.